My name is Kyle Sullivan. I am the main carnival barker behind the Trexpertise YouTube channel, a sporadic but hopefully delicious video essay space. Today we're going to talk about Star Trek Picard Season 3. And there's been some time where a lot of us can sit with it and think about it. I've certainly had some opinions change on me in the time since Picard ended and the new Legend of Zelda came out. With us today is Giraffe.
Hello.
Strange new pod co-host and a black cosplayer. We'll be on 2 Star Trek related panels at DragonCon and not DragonCon, but
San Diego
Comic-Con in San Diego.
Yeah.
Is that true? What are the panels?
I can't say yet, but
okay.
One is going to be about science in Star Trek, and one is going to be about Star Trek for beginners, let's say.
Oh, I love that first one.
Okay. Star Trek for beginners. Where should people start?
Exactly.
Oh God. You mean you don't know? You don't have a roadmap?
That's what we're gonna do.
Next we have Cicero, a voiceover artist, and you'll have to tell me. You typed out TTRPG. I'm too old. What does that mean?
That is tabletop role playing game.
Duh, Kyle, you idiot.
You're not a D&D nerd, Kyle? Come on.
I used to be, but it was before we had tables. It was a while back.
Well, at least tops. They had tables, but there were no tops on those tables.
It was topless RPG.
Topless.
Let's go.
Honestly, I'm here for that now.
Yeah.
Hold on, is that a different thing?
Yeah.
Right. It was in the Red Rune district.
Oh yeah. There you go. Apart from being a voiceover artist and a panelist, sometimes host of Discovery Debrief podcast, which is a familiar haunting ground lately, favorite of mine. You're also a co-host of Test Your Might video games. Is like a Mortal Kombat thing or something?
It is, right? So it is a video game. It is the internet's only video game debate show. So if you've ever watched a debate show, maybe a Beltway show if you're a political fan, or if you are a sports fan and have watched shows that appear on ESPN or on Fox Sports or something to that effect, this show is very similar to those things and equally as nonsensical. So please come and hear, like, you've heard the news of the week about video games, and now you want to hear your favorite people talk about how that could be even more ridiculous. Come and check out Test Your Might.
Well, let me know when you guys hook up some Legend of Zelda, because I'm primed.
Oh, well, we're always hooking up some Legend of Zelda. I mean, it's Zelda time, man.
Yeah. For anyone who wants to know what my fandom is that's larger than Star Trek, you've mentioned it twice.
There we go. All right. So, I just want to say before we go further, Shaka when the walls fell to everyone.
Temba, his arms wide.
I was going to say, I was like, Toomey saying, wait.
Sean, when he was a puppet.
Sean turned into a puppet. Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be good. All right. Next, we've got Brandon Fibbs, a television and podcast writer / producer. He's worked on Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, The Story of God with Morgan Freeman, Expedition Unknown, the excellent podcast 9 Days in July, which I wholeheartedly recommend.
Thank you, sir.
And another little podcast that's up and coming called Wiki Surfer.
Never heard of it.
Yeah.
I like my co-host, though.
He also runs a very popular history and science TikTok, Stay Curious, my friends. Stay Curious, my friends, which is blown up and is quite a little slice of TikTok. And it says here you're a Star Trek fan long before anyone heard of Jean-Luc Picard.
I was weaned on it as a child.
So before tables and tops.
Before tables and tops.
topless.
Yeah, or topless or anything.
Yeah.
And topless.
Right. They were just legs. They were all legs.
I'm trying to picture that, and I can't.
We got legs. All right.
And last but certainly not least at all, is
Least, it's fine.
Jessie Gender. Definitely a huge Star Trek YouTube presence, filmmaker and a writer, and you've got a lot of spinning plates in the air as far as film and such. But for me, like, I see you a bunch in Star Trek circles and on Twitter, where I used to haunt. I'm not there as much anymore.
For the best.
And on YouTube. And so everybody here is an esteemed human being of the planet Earth, and at least one of us is from Romulus. And we're here to talk about Star Trek Picard Season 3. Why is it different? Why is it not different? What are the quibbles and sins? What are the strengths? What do we, guilty pleasure about? And a whole bunch of other subsidiary stuff. Let me start by asking some brief overall impressions. Did it feel different than seasons 1 and 2 of Picard and of Discovery and the rest?
I thought it felt entirely, other than a few quibbles, particularly at the very end, I thought it felt entirely different than modern Star Trek. The aforementioned, no, I guess I haven't really mentioned it, but the often named New Trek sort of world. I thought it felt completely different. This was the first time in 25 years that I actually was excited to watch Star Trek, smiled my way, laughed my way, cried my way through every episode, watched them like a half dozen times, and I have not felt that way about Star Trek since Voyager went off the air.
And just to be clear, like, you aren't a guy who's like, screw New Trek. You're like, there's stuff you like. Like, I know you are a Lower Decks guy.
I enjoy Lower Decks because I think that everybody should be able to poke fun at themselves, and Star Trek is certainly a franchise that has plenty of things to make fun of. And if you can't laugh at yourself and the things you love, then you should probably take a step back. So yes, I do enjoy Lower Decks. I have mixed to good feelings about Strange New Worlds, and is that all? No, I love Prodigy.
Prodigy is amazing.
Prodigy is absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
But I hated Picard 1 and 2, seasons 1 and 2, and have been just very disappointed by Discovery.
Okay. Jessie, any overall impressions of Picard season 3?
Mine is, I initially really liked it, at least as we were watching week to week. But as the season came to a close, I found I was getting more and more disappointed in it. And then especially having seen the season finish and then sort of seeing the totality of it and sitting with it for a while, my estimation of the season has continually gone down. And I have a lot of problems with a lot of the things that this season says. That being said, there are elements and pieces of this season that I do like that we'll get into in the nitty-gritty. And there's a lot of things that I do like about this season. But on the whole, I feel like I have a mix to bad feeling on the season that we'll get into the pieces of. And this is from someone who, I've loved all aspects of Star Trek. I don't think there's a Star Trek show that I dislike, just to sort of give that history. Like, I watched Star Trek since, I was a little kid, watched, TNG. Deep Space Nine is my favorite growing up.
Yes.
Yes.
And I love, which is the correct answer. But I love all of the new Star Trek shows too. Lower Decks being my favorite personally. I really love Discovery because it is that messy friend that you're just like, you know what, you're a mess, but I have fun with you, and I enjoy that you bring a fun energy and a new energy here. But sometimes I just have to shake my head and go, oh no, why? But I love you.
Accurate.
And Picard's been the only one that has continually been like the one that I have a disappointment in as a whole show. And I will say it is season 3 is better than season 2. And I wouldn't say worse than season 1, but I have issues with both of those seasons in different ways. So we'll leave it there. Yeah. So.
Giraffe.
Yeah,
how do you feel?
You ask if that hit differently, and that definitely hit differently for me. It has been hard for me to go through the series starting episode 1, to be honest. I think it's the only series I've almost not reviewed with my crew, because after watching the episode, I was just like, I don't want to talk about it. I just can't talk about it. I mean, I love Prodigy is most probably my favorite track out there right now. I'm a big Discovery girl. I mean, I just love this. Yeah, it's messy, but Discovery put me in the chair for the first time in my life.
Mhm.
So that's that.
It made you a Star Trek fan. Discovery made you
I
a
know
Star
it
Trek
made me a
fan.
captain. I was
Oh,
a black
okay.
woman sitting in the chair. I was
Understood.
finally
Understood.
part of the lore, I was
Absolutely.
not only the
Absolutely.
communication officer, I was the freaking captain.
Hell
And
yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's one of my like core memory when I watched that episode for the first time. So, it's I have an emotional attachment to Discovery.
Sure.
And I've liked Picard so far. I mean, I had my issue like everybody, right? But bringing the Romulans in season 1, you can imagine how ecstatic I was about it. So this season definitely hit very differently for me. And the reception of the season was also very rough for me. That we'll talk about it later, I suppose.
Interesting. Okay. Cicero, thoughts, concerns, questions, comments.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to hear the rest of the panels. So thank you, Kyle, for allowing me to go last, right? Because I got a chance to listen to everyone else's opinions about their feelings about this particular season and their feelings about both New Trek and and Trek Classic, right? And I've got to say that I am almost exactly opposite of Jessie. and
Hell yeah.
like it's so funny to me that as we were watching the series and first off, let me thank you and say what a great addition you were for us this season on Discovery Debrief, talking about Picard, Kyle, and all of the things that you brought along with our conversations.
You mean
that
terrible
really,
jokes about Waffle House? That's
oh
all
yeah,
about.
yeah.
There were
I mean,
those.
they were there, and
were
they were
food jokes.
important. Yeah, they were important. But the fact that you brought different observations and perhaps ways in which this particular season, the breadcrumbs that they were throwing out, where those things led to, the conversations that we had around that were spectacular, and they were things that I really look forward to having week in and week out, even when the episodes didn't necessarily enthrall me as much as the conversations did. The fact that we were going to have these conversations, and I knew that we were going to really start to speculate on what those possibilities could be, really helped energize me. And when we got to the end of the season, right, because we believed that we were going down some impossible road, right? Some impossible road that was going to lead to an incredible breadth of riches for us, the people in the room, right? And it turns out that they weren't anywhere close to where we were speculating, and they went in a direction that not only was not what we anticipated, but was also kind of predictable and a little bit disappointing. And in terms of making the main villain the Borg, and making the main villain the Borg in the way that they made them the Borg, and making the main villain the Borg in the way that they made them the Borg at the time that they made them the Borg, right? Like in the in the penultimate episode, at the end, the third act of the penultimate episode.
Fair.
Like all of that stuff made it really disappointing. But in retrospect, and I think at the in our season review, and when we talked about the last episode and how we felt about it holistically, I said that I would probably think back on this particular season fondly, right? Because of what the season promised and what it delivered, right? What I wanted it to deliver, it delivered. And all of the other stuff was kind of extra. And I thought that I would look back on it fondly, but critically, I had a lot of problems with it. That critical eye is gone, right? 2 weeks is all it took. I don't care anymore, right? Like I realize as I get older, I get a little bit more self-reflective. I realized that the conversations that we had in the room were the conversations that we were having in the room for us, right? And everybody that was listening to us was also in the room with us, right? But season 3 of Picard wasn't for the people in the room. Season 3 of Picard was for every single TNG fan that loved that crew and maybe never watched another bit of Star Trek after Jean-Luc Picard and, after All Good Things. And that's what that show was for. It was for us in the room and for everybody outside of the room. So it was for the Star Trek nerd and everyone. And for the Star Trek nerd and everyone, they absolutely delivered on the promise that those people probably wanted. And we can talk about the critical stuff, and I'm sure Jesse's got a litany of things
I can bring up my book.
right, to talk about, and you're gonna be right about all of those things, and it still won't matter, because when it's all said and done, did they get that crew that you love back together? Did that crew get to a ready room and sit around and have conversations like you love? Did they sit on the bridge of the ship that you knew, right? Mm-hmm. Did they save the day? Somehow they did. And did they play poker together like friends, and you got to see that love and that bond with them? Yes, 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 and yes. The end, right? They delivered on a promise.
I compared it to a road trip, Cicero. Yeah. I was like, because by it ended, like my least favorite episodes were all the very end episodes. Yes. And that's where I actually found myself actually angry at it multiple times. And then I found myself thinking, like you, just a couple weeks afterwards, it didn't take that long. I was like, you know what? When you're in the middle of a road trip, you're on a long road trip, you're so sick of being in that car. You're eating crappy food. You're really tired. You just want to be at your destination. Right. And then after a little while, once you finally get there, it only takes a couple days and you're like, that was such a good trip. I enjoyed seeing these things and hanging out with my friends and having these conversations. And suddenly all those criticisms that you had, which were totally valid and absolutely there and absolutely infuriating, just go away. And you're like, all you remember is, that was a good trip.
Right.
Well, the big difference, for me, if I may jump in, is that when we watched TNG in the 90s, it was a certain world, right? I was not on TV. I was nowhere seen. Like, I'm a TOS fan because it's the only show where I ever saw a black woman in the bridge, and we were used to it. When we go back and watch movies from the 80s, sometimes I'm appalled, like how were we watching this? Like, I love Ghostbusters, but the first one, they're rough nowadays, right?
Right.
The difference with TNG then and Picard now is that our society and our medias have evolved. And once you've got me in, you let me into the room, and then you close the door in my face and you keep me outside of the bridge, there is a lot of feelings, right? So seeing them on the bridge, seeing them back, it is great. It is fantastic. But at what price for the fandom?
And this is, and I would agree with you. So I can come at this from so many different ways. Because for me, there's the level of like representation, and I feel like there are storylines that this season does that I found to be some sort of benignly like meh, some that I found to be regressive, and some that I ended up finding offensive. On that level, like for example, the way the women are treated in this season does to harken back to like the way TNG women were treated a lot in the show, where like a lot of it is like motherhood, like women defined by motherhood and carrying roles. Like Beverly this whole season is like, her whole thing is she's the mother to Jack, and then shoved back in the doctor role and is kind of relegated to the side for the most part, except for when she has to come up to talk about Jack stuff. Same thing with like all the like Deanna is kind of thrown into that as well. You even have like Raffi's sort of main arc for a little bit in season 1 is kind of defined around her motherhood to a degree. She gets a little bit more with Worf, which I actually did enjoy that stuff quite a bit. And we sort of get a lot of those moments for a lot of the women in a way that just feels like it's regressive to the 80s. But then you also get like this denial of queer women where it's like, hey, look, between seasons 1 and 2, apparently Raffi and Seven got together, then broke up. Then they get together at the end of season 2. Then, between seasons 2 and 3, they break up again. We don't mention it except for a single joke that Worf makes at one point, which I find to be jerking around queer people in a way that I think is offensive. And Terry Matalas did an interview where he justified it with being oh well, we knew we were gonna have them end up on the bridge, and we didn't want them to like have this conflict of interest of like a captain first officer dating. And I'm like, number one, why wouldn't you show that journey? Because that's an interesting journey for them to talk about on screen.
Mhm.
And then number two, since when is that a problem? I mean, quite literally, this season is about Picard, the captain of the Enterprise, having a relationship with Beverly
true.
and them having a secret love child. And then you have Worf and Jadzia, so many other characters. So it's like it's scrutinizing a queer relationship. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying like they hate queer people or anything, but it is hyper scrutinizing a queer relationship that because it is queer, because I think they're thinking about it more in a way that they wouldn't overthink a straight relationship. And there's all of those things, and I can go into even more stuff, and we can get into the nitty gritty of it that I've talked about in a bunch of other spaces. But the other element of this too that I want to make sure to toss out that I think is also problematic in terms of how this show did do its nostalgia was that I actually thought the first half of the season was not great. It didn't knock my socks off. I think there's still some of the problems that has plagued modern Star Trek generally in a lot of ways in the first half of the season. Mixed with some nice evolutions of the TNG cast that I did enjoy, like seeing Worf in a different place. Like there's good in there, and I like it a lot. But then when we get to the final 8 episodes, they shunt all that interesting stuff to the side that I thought was working to just do TNG again. And we have the Borg, except for they're doing the thing the Borg do again, except for now she's like an angry mother. So again, like the way she's framed as angry mother again. And then you toss aside this changeling plot. And by the way, the changelings are here doing the same thing the changelings always do, which I like that. But it's like they're infiltrating Starfleet, which I saw in Deep Space Nine, the Homefront 2-parter.
Sure. Right.
And what offended me most with that storyline is you actually set up this great storyline with the changelings where you actually have finally in episode, I think 7, Vadic makes this excellent point.
Yes.
That is like, hey, Starfleet did some fucked up shit. And tortured me. They also continue that here's the stuff in the Dominion War, and I'm like, that's super interesting. I want to see that get evolved. And then Picard and Beverly makes this really fucked up choice of like, we should kill her to sort of preserve this status quo. And I'm like,
this fallacy, right?
Yeah, it's a messed up choice, but it's one of like, if you analyze that, if you discuss that, if you say, hey, look, because they were defending the Federation, they're going to perpetuate this trauma on this woman or this changeling, however you want to define her gender. In that's an interesting thing, but then the show just goes, we're going to toss that aside and go focus on the Borg now.
Right.
And then have the kids be like, they have like this geriatric group have to worry about these young kids being Borgified by this Borg woke virus.
Right.
Again, not the intention,
TikTok.
but the read. Exactly.
Right.
It's just like, and then it ultimately becomes status quo defending in a way that I find kind of offensive, because it's like, if you're going to bring up these issues with the Federation, I get we is like, I'm a huge leftist. I'm like, fuck the system, tear it down. But Star Trek's never going to be that. It's going to be like the ideal version of that system of like, this is a system that works, change can happen. But if you're going to bring up these issues, you have to bring that into the discussion of the system. Whereas this just does like, oh no, Federation's perfect. Now we're fighting the Borg again. We're not going to address those issues. And I found that to be particularly pernicious, especially when you're using nostalgia to do it. And I'll sort of wrap up because I know I'm ranting here because, but something Giraffe mentioned is that the way that this stoked the fandom, and I'm not saying any of you are, by the way, there's a particular side of fandom that I think got stoked by this, which was make Star Trek great again.
Oh God.
Well,
and like in a way that's like, look, they did the thing. They got the Enterprise D. They got my group again. Oh, look, this is the woke Star Trek has been awful. And now they sort of feel like they emboldened by like this nostalgia baiting call to the past that I found problematic.
I think I probably feel very much a piece of what you're saying, Jesse. My overall I had fun watching it. I got more and more not happy when we got toward the last couple episodes because the way things were resolving and the surprise villain and all this kind of stuff. I thought like the changeling splinter group was interesting because it automatically you asked in your own head like, well, what are the official changelings doing? And obviously that sets up a confrontation that might push that species fictionally down to a new space. And like, that's interesting. And everything that came before in season 1 and season 2 of Picard was very dismissed. And you could probably tell why people weren't happy with season 2, especially. And Metalis was like, we want to get to a different place that feels better. And so they were very dismissive to the point where I was like, well, what happened to Seven and Rafi? Like if they are on the bridge together, like, because Seven had like a very good I loved some of the things I was seeing in Seven in season 3, like I finally recognized her as a character. I didn't recognize
Seven and Shaw this season.
Oh my
best part of
God.
the season,
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
By far.
Yeah.
Shaw, 10 out of 10, no notes.
Yep.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
So I think that my overall impression is that it's mixed, and that Picard season 3 managed to do a thing that Discovery and Picard season 1 and 2 have tried really hard to do. They've had this blockbuster formula and all these checkboxes like, let's have a space adventure kind of a thing, which is great. Most of the time it's working. It's a flavor condition rather than my estimation that you're going to enjoy that kind of thing or not. And I found that Picard season 3, at least the first half of the season, did a really good job of balancing that style that they've chosen, like something that Discovery like just came out of the gate swinging with, like and Picard seasons 1 and 2 just sort of it felt like it was stumbling in a way, and season 3 just had a much more strident, balanced approach for most of the season. But then like it fell victim to the trappings of that formula. We're like, well, we can't tell you the villain. What good would that do to tell you the villain? We have to wait. It has to be a surprise. And the giant laser space battle at the end with every ship in the fleet, and
everything has to be an 11 in the finale.
Yeah, and like I one of the things I liked about TNG and DS9 really, but TNG, like sometimes the tension was a smaller tension. And this season, for most of the season, it felt like we're just on a ship running from people, and like those were big enough problems to deal with. Like the universe wasn't exploding again, except surprise, it is.
Right.
But yeah, we spent like 8 episodes in a like the whole. You have bottle episodes. This was a bottle season, and it's one of those things where the constraints force creativity, and the lack of money forced them to contain almost everything on the bridge for like large chunks of it, which is exactly what was Nicholas Myers's charge on Wrath of Khan. It's exactly what made that so good. It's exactly what made Balance of Terror so good. It was all like all these echoes. But then it was like in the very end, they're like, but we can't stay in this tight little claustrophobic sort of great tense thing. We got to blow it open. And then all of a sudden it's the fate of the galaxy. And you even have Seven, I think, or Crusher even says it, like, even in this grand way, like the fate of the galaxy. I'm so tired of the fate of the galaxy being at hand, especially when it wasn't even.
Go fill your taxes. Go do something boring.
Yeah.
Right. Well, go ahead. Please.
Stop marvelizing Star Trek.
I agree completely. That is one of my main problems with all of, especially Discovery and Picard, I think specifically, where it's always got to be a 10, 11 at the end of the season. The fate of the galaxy or the Federation is at stake. It never can be small scale. And I think that's a problem just throughout both of those shows. Thankfully, Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks and Prodigy gets into it a little bit at the end, but in a way
Prodigy did it right.
Exactly. Prodigy earned it in a way that the other shows didn't.
Yeah.
So like, I think that moving forward is going better. But what I will say in defense of Picard seasons 1 and 2, more season 1, and even more show Discovery. This season's made me appreciate Discovery a hell lot more, because one of the reasons I liked Discovery was a lot of its representational aspects, and not in just a way that's like, here's what Star Trek of past did to a degree, and it got better about it in certain respects. Deep Space Nine, again, better than most, was like actually allow people from different communities to feel fully represented, not just be like, here's a black person on the bridge, here's a amalgamated indigenous person here. It's the characters in that in Discovery all feel full and fully represented and get to be their full selves in a way that feels representative of the communities that they're from, not just tokens. But what I've also enjoyed Discovery for, that this season of Picard made me go back and appreciate more from Discovery, is while I dislike the always at 11, always has to be the stakes of the galaxy, I will stand by Discovery in the sense that it may not always execute it right, but it always does something weird. Because I like season 4, for example. Season 4, for example, it's like everyone's like, what's this big alien species outside the galaxy going to be? Is it going to like connect to, like, people are trying to connect it to all these like past Star Trek things, and the Discovery writing team's like, nah, they're going to be weird Eldritch horror monsters that like speak to each other with like emotion dust. And I'm like, that's weird, and I appreciate it.
I loved that. I felt that was very. It reminded me of the motion picture. Like,
that was very Star Trek. It was the motion picture meets. I want to say Voyage Home, not Voyage Home. Crap with the whales.
Voyage Home.
Yeah, it's too much pina colada. So my thing with all of this stuff is, I've often come out and said that the Discovery team has a stakes too high problem, right? The stakes are always too high, and you can't have Jack Bauer 24 every season.
Yeah,
you can't have just a very bad day, a really really shitty day. Every season, right? Because eventually people are going to get immune. They're going to be immune to it, and they're not going to feel the effect of the tension and the drama anymore, because you always seem to get out of these like incredible stakes, and it seems like only this particular ship and this particular crew, and specifically Michael Burnham, is the only person who is empathic enough and humble enough and can cry well enough to really really solve the problem. The thing that I loved about the first half of season 3 of Picard was the threat with the changelings and the changeling infiltration, right? Like Homefront part 3. Was the implications of that, right? Like bringing that in and introducing that to TNG, strictly TNG fans, right? Who and we we were lucky enough to get a friend of mine from IGN, Ryan McCaffrey,
he's great.
to come on the show and talk about his love of Star Trek and talk about an episode of Picard. And one of the things that Ryan said, and Ryan's a big, he will self-identify as a lover of Star Trek and will call himself a Trekkie or a Trekker until someone else from that fandom actually steps in, and he'll graciously kind of step aside and say, I love it, but not maybe not as much as you do. But his love stems from the movies and his time watching and enjoying and appreciating watching TNG. And that is his fandom. He didn't watch DS9. He hasn't watched Voyager. He hasn't really even given the new Treks a shot, mostly, right? He's watched some things here or there. But I think that he is representative of the people, the majority of the people, the vast majority of the people that were watching this particular season of Picard specifically. And what I thought we were getting was an opportunity to introduce them to the changelings and how the changelings, like we know that the Borg is a threat, and we've been there. And if you've watched season 1 and 2 of Picard, you've also been aware of the threat that the Borg are. But we haven't explored the changelings in a way that would give them the type of gravitas to TNG fans that they truly deserve within the Star Trek mythos as a villain. And we were going down that path. And I thought at a certain point, I was sitting there and I was saying, these are the right level of stakes, right? We've got Starfleet potentially infiltrated at the highest levels by these changelings. And now Picard and this group is going to have to go in there and try and figure out a way to suss out who these people are. Like, these are great stakes. Now, eventually the universe or the galaxy could be at stake if the changelings are able to
changeling things up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, changeling things up and really kind of poison the rest of Starfleet into believing whatever it is that their agenda was. But like that's the type of nerdy, heady, sci-fi
John Carpenter-y.
Right. That creates discourse that I think Star Trek nerds it's just like fodder for us.
Oh yeah,
we
love
it. Here's my thing with that though, and I agree with you, and in using it as a way to like introduce people to Deep Space Nine into like those elements of Star Trek, I think that's a great way to look at it in that sense. But for me, looking at it, it just feels like two things. One is Kyle mentioned earlier, like making this a splinter group. Is like, that's interesting to me because it does raise the question of like, what's the main Dominion doing? And having now watched the whole season, it kind of makes me feel like, oh, the reason they made it a splinter group wasn't to say anything politically or like evolve like the universe forward. It was to be like, let's just have the changelings and be able to do the changeling things again that they already did in Deep Space Nine, and not say anything new with them, really. And the one thing we do say new with them, we kind of toss aside at the end. And instead of being like, well, what would the changelings be now? What were they? What has caused them to evolve forward? And I'm like, if I want to go see the changelings do that changeling stuff, I'll go watch Deep Space Nine, because Deep Space Nine's still there and it exists for me. I can go watch that. And it's like, what I would want to watch Picard for is not these member-bearing moments of like, let me see the bridge again. Which is, I mean, I don't mind that in little doses, but I hate it when it's the whole story. And it kind of feels a lot of that for a lot of the season. And the stuff that is pushing forward is then sort of like tossed aside to like, it's like, oh, we'll have like Data integrate with lore. That's an interesting idea. Oh, he's just kind of Data again. Worf is like evolved forward, but he's still like kind of Worf again by the end. And it's like, we're just sort of getting these interesting ideas and tossing them aside to just do the same thing again, when it's like, I can just go watch those things and I'd rather you evolve it forward. And then another thing too, that I will also say is that to talk about Deep Space Nine and its legacy within Star Trek, it is saddening to me, because I'm working on a video right now about Deep Space Nine, and just showing so many things that Deep Space Nine did for Star Trek in a way that like really evolved it and did like without Deep Space Nine, I feel like Star Trek would not have been able to really evolve in the way that it has. And so much of Star Trek today takes from Deep Space Nine. In serialized storytelling, the sort of like the centering of others. Like Deep Space Nine did something where it's like it shows things from the perspective of those who are othered. Like every character in that series is a weirdo, not the flagship of Star Trek, and it allows people to be viewed not through this lens of otherness that Star Trek always does, of like, let's talk about, you know, queer issues or black issues or whatever issues through the lens of like, ooh, isn't this interesting? Let's judge it from an outsider perspective. But like, what does it mean to be involved in all that? And I think Deep Space Nine did that I think modern Star Trek is doing in a really cool way. And it bothers me then that then we get to these shows today where like we get Janeway back in Prodigy. We get TNG actors back all the time. And yet they take mostly the storytelling structures of Deep Space Nine and never honor Deep Space Nine. The only Deep Space Nine character we really get in any of Star Trek stuff or like evolution of that world is we get a little episode of it in Lower Decks. And then we get Worf technically. Yeah. And he doesn't even make mention of Jadzia. We don't even get mention of Jadzia. Yeah. Which seems pertinent to his character.
Like, that's crazy to me, but you know.
Yeah.
So I just want to say this. I know this kind of been a back and forth, but Jesse, you were talking about like, you know, the nostalgia, and you know, like you didn't want to see the bridge of the Enterprise again, and all of those things, and I get it, right? I get those portions of what you're saying, and you're absolutely right about what you're saying. But I will say this, you know, kind of the same thing. The Force Awakens made $2 billion, right?
I'm not saying nostalgia doesn't sell, but
right. Well, but that's the point, right? Like the point for them was, I think the point of seasons 1 and 2 was for them to make a television show telling a story. And when 2 fell on its face the way that it did, they had to pivot, right? And you know, part of it was COVID, part of it was bad writing, but when it fell on its face the way that it did, they had to pivot and figure out a way to salvage what was this original series called Picard. And the way to do that was, oh, hey, why are people tuning in? It's because they like Jean-Luc Picard. Who else was he with? Was all these guys. Well, let's bring all of those guys back because people responded well to those guys. So if I bring all those guys back in some way, shape, or form, it doesn't matter what we do with them. People will be happy if we give them all these elements. And you know what? From my perspective, they were right.
And that's here's my and I'll shut up because I know I'm ranting, but I'll just want to respond to that point specifically. I agree with you. Nostalgia sells and it works. It's not gonna be an argument that sways me as like a creative person, though, because it's like. But here's the way that I will defend it, and it will be very telling depending on where Star Trek goes from here. If doing this season was a way to like get those TNG fans, get older fans, sort of like be this thing where it's like, okay, you've been kind of out on Star Trek recently. Here's the thing that you like, and we show we can do this. And then you're like, okay, I'm on board. It gets some goodwill to Star Trek. And then they go and continue to do new stuff. and saying, let's push Star Trek forward, then I'm okay with it. My worry and concern is that it has emboldened this thing to just want to keep going back, like this push for the Star Trek Legacy show. And it's like, if you do the Star Trek Legacy show, your 2 Star Trek shows are going to be a Star Trek show set on the Enterprise with characters from the 1960s, and then a Star Trek show set on the Enterprise with characters from the 1990s. You know, and it's like, that's not evolving Star Trek forward. And I don't want to just constantly get stuck, because this is what the problem that Star Wars fell into, right? This constant looping back in on itself, telling the same damn stories over and over again, not doing something new with it. And Star Trek is always about boldly going. And so if we use the season as just like, you know what? Star Trek fans of the past, here's your season. It'll make you feel good. It'll bring you in and say, look, we can do this. We understand you. We're fans like you. And then we go forward together, unified, and we recognize and are with each other. I am so here for that. And for every person who loved this season of Picard, I want to be clear. I am here for you and I adore you. But for me, it's like, I hope the wrong lessons aren't learned. And sadly, me being the anti-capitalist person that I am, I don't have much faith of the heart.
I think you're both right. I think Cicero is exactly right. Like Kyle and I had this exact same conversation about The Force Awakens. Like I was like, you don't reinvent the wheel when you have to remind people who are walking away from you that you want to come back and stay here and you still have a place here. And so in many ways, like I didn't begrudge The Force Awakens because it had to wash the prequels out of people's minds and memories and mouths and try to bring them back in. And I really felt that in a lot of ways, that's exactly what this is doing too. I also completely agree with Jesse in that I do not want them to take the wrong lessons from this. I am fine with a legacy show. I don't want to see, unless it's maybe like somebody gets on their computer and wishes their dad a happy birthday or something like that. I don't need to see the TNG characters. We said goodbye to them. I want all in my mind, and especially before spoilers, they killed Shaw. Like I didn't, my whole thing was, I just want to see Shaw and Seven and that bridge crew and go off. And I'm fine with that, but I don't need to see the TNG. We had our goodbye and it was awesome. And we were able to have that goodbye we never thought we'd have. And then, but I want to walk away. Okay, you gave us some nostalgia. Let's walk away. As Jesse said, let's boldly go into something new and different. Let's not keep retreading the places we've already been before.
Which is why the cancellation of Discovery concerns me, because that's the show that was doing that.
So I asked your overall impressions. You definitely gave them.
45 minutes later.
Right.
No, it's all good. I my eyes are open. But I'm sensing some themes. I'm also sensing quite a few smaller categories we can get lost in. But let me pivot for just a second, and let me start with Giraffe. What was the most surprising strength of this season? What was the thing they really did well?
That's a good question. I'm like, okay, what did they do well?
If you need a second, I can answer real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Unless you want.
Jesse, I think your answer and my answer are going to be the same.
Yeah,
oh, no.
If you already have something, I don't want to take from you, but if you need a second.
No, please.
But Shaw, by far, the best thing of the season for me. I thought what I liked about him particularly was that he was a character who had a lot of flaws that you can understand where they came from. Like you could understand like his desire to be overprotective as his crew comes from his trauma with Wolf 359. His prejudice towards Seven comes from, again, his prejudice from Wolf 359, his trauma from the Borg. And that also mixing into a really good trans metaphor that gets unfortunately complicated by stuff they do with the Borg later on. But the trans focusing on Seven specifically as like a trans metaphor, he dead names her out of his trauma and stuff. I thought was a really, really cool way to talk about how trauma can beget dehumanizing other people and displacing your trauma onto people who are representative of it. Like I see people who often face a lot of like trauma from our society today get angry at trans people specifically because they sort of see trans people as like the thing that's destroying society. Is like, no, the reason you're angry at trans people is because you feel a lot of anxiety about the way we are all forced into gender roles and how like men are told to be men and something like that. And so I feel like a lot of that same sort of thing with Shaw. And what I loved about Shaw in true Star Trek tradition is the show understood that trauma. It depicted it and wasn't cruel to him, but also held him accountable and showed that you were wrong and offered him the chance to reconcile and grow and learn in a way that allowed him that chance to do so and do so in a really great way. And also just the actor was so fun. He got to be a full human. And the only criticism that I have of his character, and it's kind of a thing that's like, it's just because of the nature of you only have one season to tell this story, is that he dies in the end. Because I think it's a much more useful story to tell with characters like that, of like seeing someone continue to grow, rather than like you die and earn redemption through death. I think like earning redemption through death is a little bit of an easy trope we have in our society. And it's like, what does it mean to show a character growing? Unfortunately, that's a thing where the season had 10 episodes. They can only say 10 episodes worth of story with him. So I get that that's kind of the route they took with him. But other than that, one criticism that I understand, Shaw, best thing about the season.
I think I'm going to go with Vatic for me.
Ooh.
Palmer was just absolutely incredible in that role. I love the epicness and the literary kind of villain that Vatic was at the beginning. The scar, the style, the everything. It was nostalgia, like, these like big bad villain that look like villains. I really like that. And then the backstory was just absolutely incredible. I love when Star Trek point the finger at itself and at everything that paranoia and fear and war can create in a society. As you were saying, too bad that they actually didn't really dig into it. But I think Vatic for me was what kept me watching the beginning of the season.
Cicero, was your answer the same as Jesse's?
My answer was the same.
You heard what he said on Discovery Debrief,
right? Yeah.
So, what was it? Body pillows and things like that.
Right, exactly. So, I have an intense love affair with, really seriously from moment one, right?
Scene
like
one, that's right.
He had me at no. I just, Liam Shaw was everything in this show, and it was the one thing that I was not expecting or didn't know to hope for. And it was the thing that I was looking forward to every single episode, because not only was Liam Shaw a complicated man, right, in terms of who he was as a human being, but also incredibly flawed. But he was always right. He was right.
Mm-hmm.
The choices that he was making, the things that he was saying to our heroes, right, the people that we came to see, was spot on. And Jesse, there's something that you just brought up when talking about his trauma from Wolf 359, and we learn in that great speech that they get in Holodeck 10 Forward, that is a holdover from season 2 because they couldn't afford to build any more sets. Is all of that information, right? Like, we get that info dump of what his background was, even if we could have kind of speculated and kind of guessed it before he said it. But like hearing him say it and getting that feeling and getting the emotion and the way that Todd Stashwick decided to play this character was fantastic. But what you said specifically about his trauma and the way that he projected his trauma specifically on Seven, made me think about a fantastic movie that's on Netflix that not enough people have watched. It's Spike Lee's The Five Bloods.
Oh yeah,
that's a great movie. Yeah,
one of the final movies of Chadwick Boseman's career, sadly. But a fantastic movie that is about 4 Vietnam vets returning to Vietnam today after having been there and fighting there during the Vietnam War, to collect the bones of a fallen comrade and potentially some money. But what struck me was, and it was really not something that I had really thought about, was how the war is still going on in their heads, right? As they return back to the place where they had to literally fight for their lives. They're now sitting and talking and communicating and breaking bread with people that both look like and were the literal enemy, and have to worry about trying to figure out how to reconcile that in their brain, in their immediate reaction, their instinctive reaction, the reaction that they were trained to have was one of disdain, one of anger, one of prejudice.
Just to be clear, you're talking about Shaw, right?
Right. Yeah.
If I close my eyes, I could have sworn that you were talking about Vatic, because like Vatic didn't work for me until we got her backstory, and all of a sudden I was like, oh man, you cannot, you can only sympathize with that. And and just now hearing you speak, Cicero, like they both have a similar broil in the background, and that's interesting.
Yeah. And to Giraffe's point, the way that character was played, and it was, what's unfortunate about Vatic is that, I mean, she got the best death of the season, right?
Yeah.
She got the best death of the season, but it sucked because she was infinitely more interesting once we knew the motivation, right? And it created all of these possibilities for like narrative discovery within the course of the season, within the course of whatever comes after Picard season 3, because of all of these implications. But then we kill her. Right? And not only kill her, but neutralize the rest of the changelings.
And Shaw.
In 10 seconds.
Right. And then Shaw died, but Shaw didn't die the way that everybody else dies in season 3 of Picard. Every single other person died by being disintegrated. They were maximum killed, phaser shot, or broke into 1,000 pieces.
Exactly.
A la Vatic, right? In the vacuum of space. We didn't see Shaw disintegrate. So Shaw can he can be alive.
Your logic, you hire you immediately as a writer, sir, with that logic.
That's the same reason I think Narissa is still alive from season 1, because you never saw a body.
Yeah.
Nobody know that.
Right.
Brandon, most surprising strength.
It's Shaw. I mean, it's absolutely Shaw. Shaw is the best character that Star Trek has created in decades. I would say that and the latest iteration of Captain Pike, Anson Mounts. Like, those are the two best characters that Star Trek has had, bar none. And it's had some great ones. It's had quite a few awesome ones, even on Discovery. But I just absolutely loved him.
Lorca too. Right.
Hashtag Prime
Lorca.
As a Tendi fan, I have to toss that name out there. But anyway.
Right. Lorca before we knew who he was.
To your earlier point, Kyle, I love that this was the only time that I felt we actually saw Seven again. Like, I was like, I don't recognize this Seven that we saw before. And I wasn't, and I'm not complaining in the same way that, like, I adore, when it comes to reinvoke Star Wars again, I adore The Last Jedi. It's one of the best Star Wars movies they ever made. I have zero problem with you taking a beloved character that we haven't seen in decades and saying, you know what? They're not the same character anymore because they went through some shit and they've changed in the exact same way that you have when you've gone through shit, and stop pretending that people don't change. I don't have a problem with that. I just didn't feel that Seven's change was even remotely earned when we first met her. And so we got to finally recognize Seven in this season again, but she still had that baggage. And to Jesse's and Giraffe's point also, like, but I want to know why that change has occurred and stuff like that, because that needs to be explained. Even though I think Raffi is one of the worst characters, probably my least favorite character Star Trek has ever created, main character ever created. Sure. You got to explain that. You still just don't, you still just can't take that massive thing and just ignore it and walk away. Yeah. The other thing I would say, other than that, and even to your point also about some of those, like the Dominion, and really we should have gone into some of these changeling issues. We absolutely should have. Like, we had that moment with the Farpoint aliens, which was, I call them the Farpoint aliens. That, the moment where they're birthed out of the singularity,
the nebula, the pregnant,
which was
nebula.
Gorgeous. It felt so much like Star Trek, and so could have all the ramifications to do with the changelings being tortured. We should have talked about that. And they would have. I sincerely believe they would have, had it not been for the fact that Metalis was very clear in the beginning. This is not a season of Star Trek. This is a 10-hour movie. And you don't do that in a 10-hour movie. I think if it was a season, that would have happened. But it didn't. And the last thing I would say is the thing that surprised me and just brought me joy is Jonathan Frakes was the MVP of this entire season. That Riker character, he was just wonderful.
He was
wonderful
seasoned.
all season. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was like,
you're seasoned in the right way. Yeah.
All the right ways. Like every time he was on screen, I was like, the show's called Picard and Riker is stealing every scene he's in, unless it's in with Shaw. And then Shaw's, of course, going to win that battle.
Yeah. I think for me,
it's interesting that he's the character too that most directly deals with TNG season 1 ramifications in his character.
Sure.
Which is interesting. Not to say TNG season 1 was, Picard season 1, excuse me. Not to say it was perfect, but there were ideas in Picard season 1 I liked. Execution left a lot to be desired. Ideas were fantastic. I think overall.
Yes.
I think Shaw probably might be mine, but I think 7's a close second. Like you're saying, we recognize 7 again. Like there was a moment when they're parked in front of the museum, and Picard's son and her are sitting on the bridge, reminiscing about the different ships, and Voyager pops up. And like here's a very lovely lesson for anyone listening about how to use nostalgia to describe character. Because like 7, suddenly you see that hole burning in her. Like she's just looking for another family to fit the one she had. And I'm like, oh my God, please put her on a starship with Shaw and let's do that. Because like the promise of that in that scene was so strong. But Shaw was interesting. I think they shouldn't have killed him for that reason, because I wanted to see Shaw and 7 begrudgingly respect each other and come to love each other as comrades through successive seasons of a quote-unquote Star Trek legacy with a whole bunch of new characters. I thought that would have been a great
I think we need more stories of people learning to grow through trauma and hate, and I'll say bigotry is probably the best way to put it. Like there's a little bit of bigotry on Shaw's part towards X-Borg. And I think we need more stories of that we don't get in our society enough today. I think a lot of our society is like, oh, you die, you earn redemption through death. And it's like that is a sort of like kind of one that ultimately is like leads this like cult of like death is like the way we earn redemption or things like that. It's like, no, we grow through
Today's a good day to be redeemed.
Yeah. No, we grow through earning it. You know, I don't think our society has this accountability problem where we view it's like if we accept accountability, that means we're going to be destroyed. Like we're all going to be, it's like, no, what accountability means is it means you accept that you made a mistake and you're willing to grow from it. And when you do that, it means that we as a society can grow together and heal together. We need more stories about that. And I think that's what Star Trek, when it's done well, does the best, because it recognizes, hey, my favorite Star Trek quote of all time is from Data, which is, we must strive to more than we are. We will never, it does not matter, we'll never reach that ultimate goal. The effort yields its own rewards. That's what Star Trek to me is always about. It's like, everyone always says Star Trek's about a utopia. For me, Star Trek's not about a utopia. It's about a society that is striving to be a utopia and understands that that's the goal, that it's about enabling everyone to get to be their full selves and working together to be their full selves. And that's what I think Shaw could have done if they had been able to do more. But
if Shaw stays dead, I'm glad they had that little final scene with him, but I would have much rather seen that complicated relationship with 7 continue on into like another season and just be able to explore that more. Can you imagine the conversations they could have had about the Borg and everything, and him continuing to process rather than just trying to wrap it up so fast?
Yeah.
Especially when you use the Borg as like not to get too political, and I'll stay top level, but I think it's a pertinent discussion for our society today, is like a fascism metaphor. The Borg are very good fascism metaphor about like how it's this thing, this person at the top, the Borg queen, this dictator who wants to make everyone be cogs in her machine to just all fit this function for society, and how that can leave people traumatized, like 7 being traumatized, Shaw being traumatized in different ways, and how fascism can pit people against each other. Like 7 and Shaw are both victims of the same Borg in different ways, and they are pitted against each other instead of fighting the actual problem that is like these fascist things in our society. And that's how fascism works we see growing issues with that today in our country. Again, I'll leave that specifics of that off to the side, but like it sets people against each other when the way to fight those things is solidarity and recognizing people's full humanity. I think that would be such a great storyline to have continued. Yeah.
Yes.
No one's mentioned the other surprising thing is Sydney LaForge, personal favorite of mine.
Yes, absolutely.
I really loved her. I thought the LaForge sisters dynamic was interesting. I love LaForge, Geordie LaForge, when he's talking to Picard in person first.
Right.
About how, like, I'm sorry, dude, I'm a dad. I got to make a different choice. And I love he put his foot down about that. And that felt like an interesting character growth for him. But that's a side thing. Sydney LaForge is a slice of delightfulness, and I definitely wanted to see her in a new show.
Yes.
We talked briefly about nostalgia levels. Let me ask each of you guys. Let's start with Giraffe. I want to understand because I felt it was more balanced than normal in this whole show, Picard seasons 1 and 2 included. What was a moment when the nostalgia level worked, and then maybe what was a moment when the nostalgia level failed?
I think nostalgia works only when it's here for something. So we've had a lot of shows that are nostalgic. Like Discovery is a nostalgic show. It starts with Spock, and Strange New Worlds is definitely a nostalgic show. I mean, I'm a TOS fan, so for me, there is nostalgia in these shows, absolutely. Even in Lower Decks and even in Prodigy, but it's here to hook fans to look for something new. And we go into this new adventure. We discover these new characters, and we get new stories. So for me, nostalgia is like, the umami in a plate. It's here to bring your appetite and have this like saliva kind of. But if it's only that, then there's no flavor to it. There's only one flavor to it. And we need to think about all the people that we leave behind, because I feel Picard is one of the hardest show to watch if you don't know Star Trek.
Oh man, yeah.
So
certainly this season.
Certainly this season, yeah. Even Picard season 1, like my husband didn't know anything about the Romulans, and I was like, so these guys, you need like to go and like look for your notes. When Strange New Worlds is not like this, they always explain. Even the references to Discovery, they're made in a way. Prodigy is like absolutely a newbie show with a lot of nostalgia in it. So for me, nostalgia didn't work in Picard, because I was expecting to see these people grow. And we were speaking about Sydney LaForge, for example. Well, I was expecting Geordie LaForge so badly. You can't imagine how I was with my Geordie LaBear, and I was like, where is he? And I had met LeVar Burton literally like a month before, and I was still starstruck, and I was like expecting, he doesn't come. And I'm like, where is he? And when he shows up, do we feel that he had grown? Like, his figure as a father disappointed me atrociously, because he doesn't trust his daughter. He doesn't believe in them. He has them in Starfleet, but he wants to protect them. I live in a military city. We have a lot of Marines here, right? We have a lot of military family here. I have never seen a military father not wanting to protect their kids when they are in the forces. Also, you're proud of your kids, and you trust them because you grew them, and LaForge not trusting his daughters, or being, like the father, like, if you talk to my daughter, you'll have problem. I was like, it's archaic. It is so archaic. I was so sad to see him in that kind of favor that would be, threatening the boyfriend. And I'm just like,
The other thing too with LaForge too that also disappointed me too was, sorry to not answer the nostalgia question, but I'll answer that too. But like with him, it's like LeVar Burton had been open about, like, one of his major problems with TNG was the way that Geordi was not given a partner.
yes.
And he expressed it, called, I think, in an interview with Rolling Stones, it was like, it was a blind spot by the writers' room, especially the very white writers' room, of a black man not being able to, like, have a full relationship, and all these other characters getting that. And so it was weird to me to be like, okay, he has kids, but not show him being in a relationship with somebody, to not rectify that wrong.
That would have been interesting.
And you hear
Yeah,
about
and
to
I'm
see
like,
that on
would've-
screen.
you hear about the mother, and she's she's never like said as the wife. It's like your mother will expect us for dinner or something like this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and that's all.
So to be fair, that did give all the Geordie is gay shippers lots to deal with. But that doesn't address the main problem. But the fan fiction community, I know, is ablaze.
Quick side question about the potential wife. When they mentioned her, did everyone think of the same person? Did everyone cringe the same way?
No.
I was like, please don't be Leah Browns.
Yes.
No.
That's what
Dear heavens, no.
No, because those kids are black.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, there is that, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So there's that part, right? Like, you know.
Listen, I'm biracial, right? And when they were on screen, everybody was like, oh, it's Leah Brahms. Like, these kids are not Leah Brahms.
Right. They're not biracial.
They're not biracial.
They're from the factory.
Jesse, you're going to mention a nostalgia bit that worked and maybe one that didn't work?
Sorry.
No. That's perfectly fine. No, for me, like nostalgia, like I said, I think it works best when, like, the problem that nostalgia comes in is it's a lack of self-reliance on your own stories, trusting your own stories. It was the thing that I had a problem with. Like, I like Discovery, but I do have an issue with like the first season of Discovery being like, well, Burnham's related to Spock, and it was like not a trust in their own character of Burnham. It's like, we need to legitimize her by being related to Spock. Now they've gone on to do interesting things with that, both in Discovery and Strange World. So they've justified it after the fact. But that first season was like, we don't trust our own voice, so we're gonna do this. We're gonna legitimize this thing this thing that does work. And which is, for me, the thing that didn't work this season, Picard, is the finale. It's like they didn't trust themselves to deliver a finale that was building upon what they had already done. Because all this, like, where this season lost me was when it did do that finale and just did the same thing again. It's like they're in the Enterprise D fighting the Borg, and both of those things are doing the same thing that they've always done, attacking Earth. There's some slight little spice here and there that's different, but overall the exact same thing. Even down to like the finale ends with them playing poker with the exact same shots that they did from the TNG finale. Like that, it's just it's a lack of adding anything new to it. That I think that was the most disappointing aspect of nostalgia, because it was like a lack of trust in their own ideas to follow through as like finale. It's like you didn't want to trust. Your ideas were good. Your ideas were very good, and you tossed it away so you could do the thing that you know would get the easy choice. And I feel like that was disappointing. The nostalgia that worked for me was when you take it, you use that nostalgia and evolve it in a cool way. So this isn't probably the best option, but since we haven't talked about it, I'll mention it. I really liked how they initially did Worf.
Yeah.
Because they showed Worf he was a man who was like always searching for an identity, searching for itself, and he would like look for it through the Klingon culture and be like, I'm going to be the best Klingon can be. But then that gets complicated in Deep Space Nine. So at the end of Deep Space Nine, he's left a little adrift in the sense of like, oh, I wanted to be the best Klingon, but now I see the Klingon society is kind of bullshit a little bit, or like it needs to change. I think it's probably the better way to put it. It's like it needs to change in the way it was. So I can have that perspective. And then you have this gap, and we come back to him, and I can track that story of him being this person's like, I'm more of a pacifist now. I'm willing to use violence, but it's not my first choice. And it's like, I can track that arc. I get it. It makes sense. And then he brings that to Raffi. And so it's this nostalgia that like builds upon where you've seen his character grow from. And then it brings it to the character of Raffi, who is also this person who is adrift in her identity and sense of self. And then he offers to teach her that. And so I think that's where nostalgia works for me, where it's like you take it, then you add a little bit to it, and then you use that to inform the new. And I think that element was really worked for me in terms of.
And that not only made his character better, it made the Raffi character better. Like
exactly.
It elevated all of that.
Yes.
In a similar vein, I'm going to pull out something that I think people forgot and talk about a scene in the middle of the season also happened on the holodeck 10 forward, right? Because that's the only set that they had. And mention Jean-Luc Picard and now Lieutenant Rowe.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
There's sorry, man.
Go do it. Say it.
Steal your thunder, Brandon. But because this. So that is a moment where nostalgia did work, right? Where we got a great conversation. Yeah, we got a great conversation between these two characters that have so much history between them. That's literally all they have between the two of them is history from the moments that we saw, right? They essentially have not seen each other since we last saw them. and we're able to, as Jessie so well put it, we're able to track their emotional growth and their changes in life from the last moment we saw them to this moment in that scene.
Yes.
Now, that scene was fantastic.
Phenomenal.
Their use of Ensign Rowe or Lieutenant Rowe, their use of Rowe
Commander
was sloppy.
I agree.
Right? Like, yeah, you know, like there was that moment carried so much weight. The fact that character only existed for 35 minutes of a 53-minute episode is so disappointing, right? Because the impact of that 3 or 4 minute scene was monumental, and it would have been great to be able to build, you know, to create a little bit more of that and to build a little bit, you know, more on that during the course of maybe another episode or something.
Yeah.
And we just did not get it.
The other thing too, just to quick to say that this is another good thing to use nostalgia for that I think that Rose scene did well, was it also complicates the past. Because one of the problems that I had with TNG, and D69 had a little bit of this too, is it's like the way it viewed the Maquis was very like, we empathize with them, but they're bad. And so like that episode that we ended up, where Ensign Rowe ends is like, we understand her, but it's seen as like a personal affront to Picard at the end of that episode. Yeah. And we're meant to sympathize with, I think, Picard overall, because he's the lead of our show. And what this episode allows that to go back and do and be like, no, Picard, you were full of shit. And be like, you could not separate Starfleet from yourself. And you saw me betraying Starfleet as a betrayal of you.
And, so
and I'm like, that is a way that goes back and makes that TNG story more complicated. That I think is a good way to like use nostalgia to like retroactively make the past stories more complicated too, not just the present ones. So I think that was a good way. And then they fridge her, which is like also goes indicative of what I was talking about with representation. Women
she should still be alive. Justice for Roe. Hashtag Justice for Roe. Brandon, what are you thinking?
Yeah, for me, Roe was my favorite bit of nostalgia in the show. I didn't hate how she was off as much as I know you, Kyle, did. I know you did, Cicero. Although at the same point, like that was nostalgia for purpose. She was there for a reason. There was a lot of history there. I hated the initial, like there were a couple moments while the writing just, they seemed to really understand the character so well. There were several moments in this series in this season where I thought, oh my God, do you even know this character? One of them was some of the exchanges between Picard and Riker, and like even when Riker was like, "You've killed us all," I was like, "You would never say that. You would have never had those conversations leading up to it. You would have never said that. You would have never seen this in front of the junior officers." And as a military person myself, as a veteran myself, even what Jessie was saying about, or Giraffe, can't remember which one of you were mentioning, like Geordi's actions, like what he was talking about protecting his kids. No, he wouldn't have. No, he wouldn't have. That's not how you act. But at the same time, the other moment that really bothered me was how Picard was acting once he saw Roe. He was wrathful, but it was wrathful not in a legitimate sense. It was out of character wrath. It just didn't fit with Picard. He was wounded in a way that just didn't make sense to me. And so I really did appreciate the fact that when they got into 10 Forward, they had a moment that just really seemed to be a genuine pouring out of the heart and catharsis and stuff like that. Because otherwise, there was a lot of, there are so many bits of nostalgia in this season that most bits of the nostalgia in this season, the first time I saw it, I was like, screw you, you're way over the top. And after a couple of viewings, I was like, okay, I'm going to accept it or whatever. But like, the first time I said the Enterprise bridge, I'm like, oh my God, that's gorgeous. And damn you for even putting this on the screen. Well, or when they're at the museum and you're seeing all the starships, Kyle, I know you like that. I was like, going too far. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, but what would the starships be that would be at a museum, a Starfleet museum? Would they be those exact starships? Yes, they would. So like on some level, that's okay. But I think inside Daystrom, the station with all the little member berries and all the things, that's where I was just like, guys, enough.
Especially that episode where it's like you have that same episode is like they go to 2 different locations and both of them are member berry factories. Like
Yeah.
that's so it's like here's the Fleet Museum, and then here's the
That's right. That is the same episode.
Same episode. It's like both places are member berry factories.
I love 2 things about those, member berry stations. One, that the HMS Bounty's there and that it plays a part. I was like, that's the weirdest choice. But James Kirk's body, really?
Yeah.
Right,
and it never gets explained.
And I hope to God the books.
And I hope to God they don't either. Don't. I mean, I guess if they went back and pulled the Enterprise D saucer section off Meridian 3, they wouldn't have left Kirk's body. So the question is not why is Kirk's body not still on Meridian 3. The question is why does Section 31 have it? That's
I think I've said it before. Probably on Discovery.
Paul Bettany. Yeah, bring Paul Bettany into Legacy.
There you go. Yeah, I was saying on Discovery Debrief, live your life in a way that your skeleton is redacted by Starfleet.
Right. But they also, they also had Archer, and of course they also had Picard. Like that was the weird thing. It's like you had 3 of the captains of all this. Like the only one you didn't have is Janeway. That's because she's still alive.
And they will never get
that's because
her.
she didn't captain the Enterprise. So
as you say, every Enterprise captain just has to get
every Enterprise captain must
except for John Harriman. He doesn't deserve it.
Harriman hate.
Deserve worst casting in Star Trek history.
Yeah. Well, also Captain Pike he's in some beep boop machine somewhere
On Talos 4.
On Talos 4.
He's living his best life on Talos 4,
So they can't have him in Section 31.
Completely different thing. Completely off topic. I love how they introduced that tension for Pike at the beginning of Street.
Anyway, that's another way of nostalgia being used building upon what Discovery did. And also nostalgia at the same time. Like that's a great example of it.
Let me switch gears again. We're gonna go in R and talk about the score. I don't know if you guys are all music people or not. I definitely am. I know Brandon is a score enthusiast, but like I felt like the score in season 3 was particularly delicious. It was laced with nostalgia, but the actual technical scoring of it, the way it was laced, was so different than the previous Picard seasons and Discovery. Like Discovery, in my opinion, has one of the greatest opening themes in Star Trek. I really love that music, but like something about this score was really selling it. And maybe Brandon, you know the technical details on who's been scoring, but like I feel like it was a different person than normal.
It was
people than normal.
Yeah, student. Yeah.
You had a German video game composer who did, I think, 2.5 episodes or whatever, and then you had David. Why am I blanking on his name?
Stephen Barton. Stephen Barton.
Yeah. And they did a tremendous job. Like I will say, some of my nostalgia issues were with episode 1. There were times when the music leaned so much into nostalgia, even when it was pulling things not from, like when they're leaving Space Dock and it's like James Horner, Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock. I'm like, okay, you're evoking the wrong Star Trek nostalgia here. You're pulling from TOS when you should probably be pulling more from TNG and stuff like that. But the music was astonishing. It like Jeff Russo's a fantastic composer, and I can remember next to nothing of his music other than the themes. I remember nothing of his music, whereas I found myself just bowled over by the music in the 3rd season, and particularly the Titan theme. That Titan theme is fantastic. I mean, that is Star Trek distilled in notes. It was absolutely fantastic. I love it.
I personally think that this was the best use of music in any Star Trek property in probably 25, 30 years. It just across the board, it like I would have paid admission and eaten popcorn and sat next to somebody screaming kid to listen to music that evoke these types of emotions and this level of quality from the opening theme to the end credits, right? Like it was all done. It was all cinema quality. It was all just very, 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 very good. Very good. It all felt cinematic.
Giraffe, Jessie, got comments on the score?
Yeah, I'm gonna be again the awkward duck here.
That's totally okay.
Right on.
You know, I'm a hardcore Melumad and Stan, so
She's good.
I very often like Prodigy's. The score of Prodigy is absolutely incredible for
Wonderful.
anime.
Oh yeah, I was
It's-
gonna say.
I
Prodigy's
remember
great.
reviewing the first Prodigy episode and being like, that the music has no business being this good. Uh,
That
um,
theme song, honestly, top 3, if not my favorite Star Trek theme
Oh,
song.
And that's
yeah.
not her. She didn't do the theme song, but she
That was
did
Michael
do
did.
all
She
the
was
rest.
like-
Yeah, Michael did that.
And same for Strange New Worlds. Very often I stop and I'm like, wow, the music is incredible. That did not happen to me very often in Picard. I can tell you of a moment where I was like blown away by the music that I went back and listened to the score. I really like the opening credits, that's for sure. And that's been for like the 3 season. I think they're beautiful. They bring this nostalgia, this grief, this melancholy almost that I find is very suiting for Picard. But yeah, I'm not there. I recognize I think it's because I recognize all the themes, and I'm just like, oh,
Mhm.
that's First Contact. Oh, that's Wrath of Khan. And then
Right.
Mhm.
there's no moment where I'm like, wow, I've never heard that, and it's gorgeous, you know,
Mhm.
because these like First Contact music is incredible. Same for Wrath of Khan. I love them, but I know them already. So I think maybe I was a little bit like too used to that, and I didn't pay attention of the moment where it was really new.
Yeah, I think that'd be my only complaint is that if I remember thinking to myself at one point, I think it was after Tuvok showed up, it's like, if I hear the Voyager theme one more damn
Yeah,
time,
You did complain about that a number of times. I remember getting lots of texts. No more Voyager theme.
For me, I will say I'm kind of in between like everybody here, where I'm like, I don't really have strong feelings on the score. I will say like I think it's a bit too directly drawing from a lot of things for me, kind of what you're saying, Kyle, but there are moments that I like. But the comparison I would make would be like Chris Westlake's work over on Lower
Decks,
Decks, which I think is very evocative of TNG without it being the TNG music. I think he does I think there's a lot of good music over in Lower Decks that I think goes underappreciated because it is like, it's very like, sounds like TNG, but it's not exactly. And I think it kind of gives the show a little bit of its own flavor in a way that I think this season didn't do as much in Picard, because it was drawing like more specific quotes from different pieces. And there's stuff that, like the Titan theme I thought was great. But I think if I had to toss up like my favorite overall like soundtrack score for any show, I would actually give it to Strange New Worlds, because I think that like Strange New Worlds gives this really nice sense of like wonder that I don't think even any of the other Star Trek shows have really captured. I think specifically of the moment in the pilot where Pike is giving that big speech about like World War III, and there's this very like ethereal vibe to that soundtrack that just like sends chills down my spine every time I listen to it, and it like gives you that sense of like melancholic yet hopeful wonder that I think Strange New Worlds does really well. And just to no spoilers, but I've gotten the screeners for season 2, and they use that theme a lot too in season 2 and at very poignant moments, and I'm like, oh, this is a recurring theme of this, like it just every time I hear that ooh, that like ethereal noise, there's like chills
Yeah,
down my spine.
Nami did a wonderful job. I've been chatting with her over the last couple of months just because they took so long to finally just dropped that Strange New World score like 2 weeks ago or whatever. It was taking so long, and like I kept going. I was like, when are they doing this? And she's like, I'm trying. But yeah, it was amazing. When she came on, I didn't like her work as much on Strange New Worlds as I did Prodigy, just because I think Prodigy allowed her a much sort of like
bolder,
brighter colors to play with.
Yeah.
And I think probably even with all the good that I've said about Picard season 3's music, I think Prodigy is probably my favorite music that anything in a modern Star Trek has written. It's just magical. There's just a sense of playful optimism and wonder to it that doesn't get touched by anything else.
I think we all can agree Prodigy kicks ass. It's like,
yeah.
Just a general rule. Yeah.
It doesn't have any business being like that. Like Cicero, you complained about this a while back on Discovery Debrief about like who's the show for, but like, you know, it looks like something for 8-year-old, 10-year-olds and under. But like, if you're a Star Trek fan, like it is perfectly organized story. The characters are rich and growing, and like the way they use nostalgia is effective across the board. Like when you finally realize the stakes of where the ships come from and how Janeway's connected, it was like, that is very organic feeling. And it's probably the best use of nostalgia in modern Trek, unless you're telling a joke, Lower Decks.
I'll fight for Lower Decks, but I'll fight that fight another day. But Lower Decks is my personal fave. But
I've got quibbles with it, but I recognize that those are great characters. I recognize that the show is created by people who absolutely adore Trek and understand it, and I recognize that what is it Nicholas Meyer says about pouring the vintage into a newly shaped bottle or something like.
I like that metaphor you did in your video. That was a good one. Yeah,
it fits really well. Lower Decks is proof that you can take this form, you can take this ingredient and put it into any kind of shape, and it'll probably work. I am dreading the eventual sitcom.
I'll just since I'll say it, I won't go into a whole dive because I could rant about Lower Decks all day. The thing I love most about Lower Decks is its earnestness. I think it is the most earnest Star Trek show, and it captures that, like, we are all here just to freaking have fun and enjoy each other and love each other so much. And I think that earnestness, I think, comes through more than even any of the other shows, even Prodigy to a degree. I think so. Yeah.
We're getting pretty close to our end time, probably. I want to ask you guys. So I've heard a lot of quibbles. I've heard some love, nostalgia being a thing, and the balance of the characters being a thing, and not representing certain kinds of people that we want to see on screen more, kind of a thing. Is Picard season 3 a good representative of like this Abram Kurtzman era? If I was trying to tell someone about all this new Trek that's coming out, would I put Picard season 3 in front of them and be like, it's like this?
Or does some other 9 and 10?
Or does
9 and 10 did? Like, I'd be like, I remember texting you, Kyle, after like the when we first meet the Borg or whatever, and I was like, did Terry Metalis and crew like step out and turn off the lights, and did Alex Kurtzman and everyone sneak back in and go, we're gonna make the last 2 episodes? Because I was like, that's what was suddenly feeling like,
I mean that in terms of both good and bad, because like, I know a lot of people have some issues with Discovery. There are things to love about that show. Does Picard season 3 also embody whatever those characteristics are? Like, is this an example of our moment in Trek? Is it this much nostalgia, this much beautiful scenery? Like, say what you will about these shows, like Discovery, they all look amazing. Like, it's mind blowing how delicious they look. But is it like an example of the whole kit and caboodle? Is it our moment in Trek? Is this the what do you call it? The mascot?
I would say probably not, because I think it evokes too much of the TNG for me, in the sense that that I think like kind of pulls too much from TNG to really stand on its own as like an exemplar of what we're doing today, for good and bad. I think there are lots of elements of, like, again, the taking it up to 11, the more fast-paced camera, the positives of, like, there being, visual stunningness, a lot more focus on personal emotion over like the larger like situation at certain points. Like, there are things both positive and negative that I really enjoy, but I don't think this captures that as well. And I think if I had to like give an exemplar of like the one that like, and I wouldn't even say it's necessarily always the best, but like the perfect alchemy of that, Strange New Worlds, I think, is probably the better like one to be like, this is a representative of Star Trek's moment. And if you like this, maybe you'll like Star Trek Picard or Discovery, and maybe go into Prodigy and Lower Decks. But if I'm just giving someone like this is kind of the vibe, Strange New Worlds is probably the best like entry place to like really capture those.
I think I agree with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because Picard season 3, by definition of Metallis's like, I'm making a 10-hour movie, that means that, like, as much as we may like something like First Contact, that's not exactly representative of TNG, the series. Right. It's an action movie that was great, but it's not the thoughtful sort of, intellectual ruminations on science fiction and stuff like that TNG was. Whereas Strange New Worlds, as to Jesse's point, is a much better sort of indicative of that. Whatever praise you want to say about Picard season 3, it's a good representation of some of the next gen movies. It's not a good representation of Next Generation itself.
I would say that depending on who the fan is, right? If the fan is the person that I've been talking about since we've been talking, which is the person whose knowledge and understanding and their love and appreciation for Star Trek and its universe comes primarily from the Enterprise D and its crew, and then movies, then Star Trek, then Picard season 3, Star Trek Picard season 3 is the show that I would definitely say, hey, watch this. And by the way, there's more Star Trek that is of varying degrees of stuff, right? This is the Force Awakens of Star Trek television shows. But like the Force Awakens, right? The Force Awakens was the thing that allowed us to get 2 more movies of differing degrees of quality.
Vastly
but it all
differing.
But it also opened us up for the possibility of having television like The Mandalorian and Bad Batch and
Andor,
Andor,
right, and Andor, right, exactly.
Watch
So, like,
Andor, Kyle.
Andor,
right,
One way out.
Oh yeah, Kyle, if you haven't watched Andor, I'm just finishing.
You've not watched it?
It's incredible.
I've been working,
Yeah,
man.
it's
I've been
incredible.
all over the map.
I keep telling him it's
best
one of the
TV
greatest
here.
things with the word Star Wars on it.
I will sit down and I
Right.
will watch it. I promise.
Right.
As someone, there's no show that makes me want to go out and punch Nazis more than that shit. Not that I don't want to,
Andor.
anyways. But after every episode,
Right.
I'm like, yeah, let's do it now. Let's go out.
Yeah,
Fight
right,
passion.
like,
Let's
where are
bring
they?
it
Where are
down.
they?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think though that were it not for the Force Awakens, there wouldn't be the space that people that are responsible for creating these, creating the space for these stories to happen wouldn't have the confidence to allow those stories to have the space to breathe. And I think while Picard season 3 isn't in that situation in the same way, but I think it is kind of the gateway drug for people that were already open to Star Trek that have maybe, not been the type of fans that we are and potentially the people that are watching this are, to sit down and watch something that they know and they love and get introduced to new elements of that universe that will allow them to circle back to what is some of the best Star Trek period in Prodigy and Lower Decks. And I think, Strange New Worlds is something that people that really, really, really loved TNG and really kind of, and grew up watching episodes of TOS will love as their Star Trek. But I don't know that they would necessarily give it a shot if they didn't have an entryway into it, and that would be Picard season 3. And I think Picard season 3 is an element of itself outside of seasons 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to know any of the stuff that's in there. In fact, right, like in the first scene of season 3, we get Picard sitting and talking to Laris, and then we never see Laris again, right?
Like
Guinan,
like hiding somewhere, like
right,
behind the
right.
camera.
Yeah. So and besides Seven and Rafi, Laris was one of the holdovers from season 1, and all of the promise, this new ragtag group of players that Picard had with him, just kind of like led you to believe this show was going to be about and the series was going to be about, and they completely left that sitting on a table.
That
somewhere.
pissed me off more than almost anything else in the show. I would pay real money to pull out that Q moment at the very end and have Picard walk into that bar overlooking the ocean that Laris was describing, and he sits down at that table with her and watches the sunset with her. That is how I wanted this show to end.
Yeah, and
I was
final
so
line.
angry.
I mean,
Final line. So who's Beverly?
If he had just talked to Laris from the beginning, this whole thing would have been one episode. She would have solved it. End of it. You have a Tal like girlfriend, and you don't use her.
She was such a great character. She was such a great character,
and she gets shafted in every single season of the show.
Every
and it's
yep.
So,
I loved her accent. That actress.
I don't think it represents the era of Trek that we are in. It was made for very precise people in mind.
Right.
Very clear.
Right.
Think of like the people who came to Star Trek lately. They don't understand that show at all, like at all. um, I watched TNG. I know TNG, and sometimes I had to go to Memory Alpha because I was like, "What is going on?" um,
Or DS9 memory alpha.
oh yeah.
Right.
But I think that what has been we're at, as Jesse was saying, we're at a very important point in what they want to
Mhm.
do with Star Trek. This show is most probably the most successful show, I think, this last year. I suppose, I think, seeing all the reaction on
Just
Twitter.
given the
Huh?
buzz, I think Picard season 3 probably the
Yeah.
given the
made,
most
made the
yeah.
Nelsons all 3 times in the top 10
Yeah.
shows, most
Yeah.
watched shows in the country.
So
yeah,
it's the most
definitely did.
successful, right? And that's great because I want Star Trek to be successful. It makes money
Absolutely.
from other show like the Academy show, so I'm like, yes, let's go. But on the other hand, we cannot ignore the turmoil that it has created in the fandom. We see right now a lot of criticism about Strange New Worlds, about people that just appeared out of nowhere and and were confronted into their point of view of Star Trek by this season of Picard. And right now, there's a lot of discourse going on everywhere,
Mhm.
criticizing that there are too many women in the on the Enterprise in Strange New Worlds, that when like the leads are two white men. And
Right.
so it has definitely empowered a part of the fandom that do not want to see Star Trek move on and continue to discuss social questions and political question as Star Trek has always done. And
Always
Always.
done.
yeah,
Right.
Always
but look
Woke
at
since
this season of
1966, right?
Oh,
Picard.
it's right.
Right. Exactly.
I look at this
Right.
But the
season,
problem-
and I think I was talking with you, Jesse, and I was telling you, what's
Yeah.
the message? That can't be the message. I watched this show, and I'm like, what? How, as a person, do I grow out of this? I watch Strange New World, and I get the whimsy and the let's go towards
Right.
people, let's meet them, let's be brave, let's boldly go. I watch Discovery, and I'm like explore ourselves, let's think about others, let's be empathetic, let's discover different people and how they go
Mhm.
through life and what are the struggle, and understand them. I watch I don't know, Prodigy, the same thing. Listen to new things and try to solve your problems. I watched Picard season 3, and I'm like, so the youth are a problem and they're being brainwashed
Yeah.
and only the old people can save them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
And then also the women are all
and
mothers
the women are all
who like
mothers,
are
but you know
causing
what?
problems.
They're not gonna be the one you're
Cri-
gonna ask for help when you're in deep trouble. You're gonna ask for help for that dude that you met 15 days ago because he's your dad.
Right.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
your dad.
Um,
Duh.
and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, literally, I think we had to wait for the third episode to have two women talking to each other.
Yeah.
And I was,
Mhm.
wow, okay. There are many scenes in Picard that deeply shocked me, like having the only two Asian actors on their knees on the bridge was absolutely shocking to me.
And also too, and this one I on that exact note, like the scene that they have when all the youths are taken over by the virus, they have the non-binary characters, the one that takes the seat on the bridge,
Yeah,
and I'm like,
it's-
I don't think that was intentional, but if someone was not self-aware enough to realize in an age where we have like people saying like that people are transing the youth.
Mhm.
To have the non-binary character to be the one that you signal as like the one taking center stage in that.
or even when we were talking
Yeah.
about Seven hunting the changeling, she shots the changeling twice, and twice it's a black person. And twice I
Right.
was like, you know what? Seeing Sinilla Forge being shot in the head was quite traumatic to me. I knew it was a changeling, but I mean, I was absolutely shocked by seeing twice in a row Seven shooting a black person. And I know, like, one of my co-hosts was telling me, so what, we can shoot only white people? And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But
I mean,
Giraffe, she feared for her life. She feared for her life. Come on, you gotta give her, give her some credit.
Cicero, I fear for my life also.
Right, I'm being completely facetious. Completely facetious.
And
Sorry.
you know, I do think, and I think, Jesse, that was from you, from our conversation. The color blindness of the casting sometimes can be very troubling to viewers that have hold on to Star Trek. Sorry, it's late and my English is gone.
No
because of
worries.
representation, thanks to representation. And I love the story. I have to say, I was enthralled by the story. I wanted to know what was behind the red door. I was into it. I wanted to know how they're gonna like Seven at the helm. Like, I love Shaw. I love Baddick. I loved all this. But at the end, when I look at it as a reviewer, as somebody that loves Trek and speaks about Trek a lot, I'm like, what's the message? When we watch that, how, as people, do we grow in our society, and how do we look at each other after that and think about each other, and where do we go from that? And the conversation going on right now from around Strange New Worlds are deeply worrying me, you know. And I do think that the creators of Star Trek show do have, when they come into this history of Star Trek, they have to think about this, because our fandom nowadays is not the fandom of the 80s. It is way different, and the world we are in is way different also.
Sure.
This is something that this is why I feel like this season is so. This is why this is what worries me. This gets to the core of what worries me with the season, is in how I think it's regressive. Because the Star Trek of the past, I love all Star Trek. I adore it. But one of the reasons I like talking about Star Trek of the past and critiquing it, and I critique it out of love, is the problem of Star Trek past is it always centered a certain viewpoint. And the certain viewpoint was usually cisgender straight white dudes. And it was about trying to, from a very, empathetic point of view, try to talk about like queer issues or the different issues that it was looking at, but it always did it through the lens of the other. And as a result of mainly the writer's room being mostly that perspective, it would get things wrong in a way that would be very harmful. Like, for example, the TNG episode about like the Outcast, which nowadays has some like positive trans readings almost by accident, because like, hey, non-binary aliens, wouldn't it be weird if people were non-binary? But it was being about gayness, and that episode ends with like saying conversion therapy is possible.
Oh yeah,
which is a harmful thing. And there's a lot of that in Star Trek, and it comes from a place of like wanting to do good. But it caused the show to become, especially when you get into like Voyager and Enterprise era, become very static in that viewpoint in a way that was really sort of like not meeting the time in which it was in. Like, they didn't do an HIV episode until like the 2000s when they had an opportunity to do it in the 80s, because they didn't feel like it was necessary, because they didn't have gay people besides David Gerald and perhaps a few closeted folks and also Brian Fuller as well, but like they weren't allowed to have that voice in the show.
No.
And what I've loved about Star Trek and I'll just finish this point and just make it quick. What I've loved about Star Trek these past few years has been, while it has been imperfect in many ways, it has allowed a lot of those voices to take center stage. And because of that, because we live in a very white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative society, there's been a lot of pushback against that, because seeing that sometimes there's people's like, we don't want to show up for that. But it's those the people to piss off. And I really love Star Trek for taking that and being like, you know what? We're not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy. The show's going to make storytelling mistakes, but we're doing it in a way to try and be empathetic and grow this. And this season, to me, to get to Jurassi's point, concerns me because not just of like the nostalgia of like, hey, we're on the bridge, but like the choices that were made feel like they are going back to that regressive model of like, let's put the queer women off to the side. Let's be enlightened and have the non-binary person, but we'll have the non-binary person be a person off to the side on the bridge, and then also we'll like have them be the one that takes the seat during the woke mind virus section. We'll like it's
not actually called out as a non-binary person on the show, only in like behind
in
the scenes
ancillary
sort of
media,
context.
so you can miss it if you're not paying attention.
Exactly.
And so it's like I don't think any of those things, like I don't think and there's a single person on that show that's like fuck non-binary people, fuck, like I don't think that at all. But it's a perspective that I think like
sense of
like
omission, not
what
commission.
sense of omission, and it causes these issues to get perpetuated and centers a certain viewpoint that then I think gets taken by, and again, to speak about where we are in a society today, there's a lot of really dark stuff happening right now, especially minorities, but overall in this country and world. And it's like we need to be very self-aware of that and understand the messages we send across. And I think this season didn't do that. It was trying to be the popcorn adventure and ended up really kind of like spreading some pernicious stuff. And it's like, this is why I think this is an important moment for Star Trek, because it's like if this was like what you were saying, Cicero, being like, this is the show to get some people who are like, I'm not so sure about this, get them in, I'm here for that. Hell yeah, let's move together and like this be the way in for those folks. Right. Yes. But if the lesson is learned, like let's keep doing more of this, let's, and nothing against Terry Matalas, but like give like I want to see more. I want to see, and I love Terry Matalas. I love Mike McMahon. Mike McMahon's been very nice. Like these are all really cool people, but like a lot of these shows are run by cis white dudes, and the one show that's run by a lesbian woman is being canceled. And it's like, let's expand this voice, not continue this, especially in the light of where the world is. Let's have Star Trek meet the moment. And I'm concerned of it not meeting the moment. So.
Yeah. So I hate to keep sounding like a broken record, but I'm going to go back to Star Wars and say that when The Last Jedi released and fans were able to see it, and their critical reaction, their knee-jerk reaction to that film, by and large, right, when you took a sense of the Star Wars fandom, there was a large contingent that just outright hated that film. They didn't understand it. They didn't like it. It didn't do the things that they thought the things were going to happen, right? It didn't have the nostalgia of, right? It didn't make them feel like the Force Awakens, and they couldn't really put a finger on why it didn't make them feel like the Force Awakens, and that's because the Force Awakens was just a New Hope, and they like didn't really comprehend how much of a nostalgia play that film was and why it was necessary for it to do that. In retrospect, we obviously see that The Last Jedi was objectively the best film of the new trilogy, objectively, right? Like it's not even a conversation anymore. And even the people that came out of the theater saying, I don't know about this, I don't like it, are coming around now and saying, you know what? Maybe I was, even if it's privately, maybe I was wrong about that film specifically, because those other two, they just don't hold the mustard. And I think that's why I think that's an apt comparison to what I'm talking about with Picard season 3, is because in order for society to progress, and Jessie, I agree with what you were saying, Giraffe, I agree with what you're saying with respect to helping Star Trek, using Star Trek as a vehicle to help society evolve, right? To become, not to become a utopia, but to continue to build towards that, right? In order for us to do that, one of the things that we have to do is we have to turn begrudging allies into allies, and we have to turn adversaries into potential allies. And one of the ways that we do that is, unfortunately, is to invite them in via pandering. And one of the ways that you pander is nostalgia. Hey, you remember that thing? You like that thing? Here's that thing. Watch that thing. Oh, remember that thing? You like that thing? Here's the thing again. Consume that thing. Now that thing is over, here's some more stuff in that world, right? Like you kind of understand the rules, you understand what's going on, you understand where it is, here it is. And yes, you're going to get people that buck against that. And yes, you're going to get people that, the most vocal people, right? The most vocal people in anything are the people that had the worst time, right? Even more so than people that had the best time, right? It is going to be those people that want to shit post on things. They want to talk about what a terrible experience it is. You know why? Because misery loves company. But what you get, what you have the opportunity to do, and and that's what makes Star Trek so freaking beautiful, is the fact that you can allow them to come in with just the most just nonsensical, ignorant rants and show them empathy and joy and educate them, right? If they're Star Trek fans, that is something that they should be receptive to. And they just have to be reminded of the fact that that's why they're here in the first place. And as much as it kind of sucks, it's kind of up to us, right? The nerds in the room, the people that are watching this right now, to look at those people and say, I hear what you're saying. But hey, check this out. What about if you think about, what happens if you think about things this way?
Yeah, so you're.
I think I'll end on this because I don't know, but I agree with you to a point. There are certain people though that I think like to use the Last Jedi metaphor. There were people that were very angry about that film. And then you got the rise of Skywalker, which was a capitulation to a lot of those people.
Right.
That was just like, let's undo all the Last Jedi stuff and just go back for the nostalgia thing.
Right.
And it allowed the loudest, angriest voices, who I don't think were ever going to show up for a woman in the seat, for Discovery, black woman in the seat, for some of those people we're never going to get. And allowing them to dictate the conversation, I think allows the decay of something really beautiful. I agree with you in the sense that there are people who have like been out on Star Trek for certain reasons that this season can definitely get. The people who are in the middle of that. I just worry, what I don't want Star Trek to do is to capitulate to the really loud voices that are never going to they never will show up for a one day we get like a black trans woman as a captain. They will never be there for that. And I don't ever want and I'm not saying this is what you're saying. I want to be very clear, but I just want to I worry about where because these people are so vocal online and they're nasty and gross, but like big corporations will be like, well, how do we sell the people? It's the same thing you're seeing with like Target stuff and Bud Light today, where it's like they'll capitulate to those people and it'll push out queer folks from being seen in these spaces because companies just want to sell to the biggest people, and they know queer people will still have to buy clothing, but they know that if you have a rainbow thing in something, then certain people won't do that. And so it's like, I want to bring new fans in, but not acquiesce to the horrible shitty people.
And we need to be careful and protecting the people in our fandom also, because to take the parallel with Star Wars, the little abuse that Moses Ingram went through during Obi-Wan is mind-boggling. And sure, people came to the fandom and people but like the fact that these voices got so powerful inside the Star Wars fandom, like created a toxic place for a black woman that literally was excellent in Obi-Wan.
Well, as a black nerd that has existed in spaces, that is par for the course, right? Like it is, and as unfortunate as it is, right? Like a person that is non-conforming in whatever way, shape, or form, right, has to understand that if they're going to exist in a medium for which there is a passionate fan base, that they are going to receive backlash.
It doesn't even have to be non-conforming. You can just be not like the majority.
I don't like.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, non-conforming in that way, right? Right, because the right, like if you're a white dude or a blonde white chick, then you're okay, right? And maybe a redhead with big boobs. But if you're not
specific,
right. But if you're not those things, you're immediately looked at as, hey, even black dudes, right? Like, we've somehow, some way, shape, and form in fiction have been normalized to a certain extent, but we still fit into tropes, right? Like the black guys, either right? He's either super angry or he's some kind of
Dangerous,
mechanic
or-
that some kind of mechanic that can rap, or he's got he's some kind of magical Negro, right? Like there all of those things are there, and so if you're not conforming to those tropes and you're exist in a space, especially if you're doing things that are avant-garde in that space, expect you, if you're not getting hate, if you're not getting toxicity, then you're not making noise. And it sucks. It absolutely sucks that's the environment that we're in. But we can't allow ourselves to be surprised by the fact that that is happening. We have to expect that it's going to happen and be prepared to respond to it in the ways that make us look as beautiful as the two families ago that existed in the White House, as the former First Lady once said, when they go low, we go high, and you have to continue to go high. You have to expect that they will go low, and you have to be prepared to go high at all times.
See, my thing is like I would disagree. My sort of thing is like we expect that we're going to get pushback, and I'll end this because this is gone forever, and this is a much larger discussion than we'll ever solve today. But just to end it, I'll just say like from my point of view is like I just like the we go low, we go high, because my thing is like we expect that we're going to get pushback, but that doesn't mean we capitulate to them. And it's not and I know that's not what you're saying, but I also don't want to be like we just take it on the chin and move forward. It's like no, we go out and punch a Nazi. Like I will punch a Nazi and I will fight it.
That's what the show's for. Go punch.
Exactly.
Right. We have the show.
Punching Nazis.
But I don't want to. But I don't want to. I don't give them anything. Like there are people that I want to bring in, and unfortunately, me saying like when I say I'm going to punch a Nazi, there'll be people's like, you want to punch somebody? How dare you? Like that's not being civil, and it's like no, we go out and punch them, and like that's not going to make me look nice. I'll get blood on my nice suit, but we have to do that. And so I think you're absolutely right that there are basically people that we need to bring in, and I definitely think like we want to try to move with empathy and grace towards as many people as we can. 100%. We also have to realize too that there's a certain point where like giving empathy and grace to certain people, they're just going to take advantage of that.
Empathy and grace doesn't mean putting your shield down and letting yourself get hit.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
Let me say this about this topic, because I think this might be a kind of odd middle ground, because like the filmmaking medium is like an emotional medium, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons Star Trek is able to do what it does in the spaces that it's been playing in since 1966 is because it's used story to, elevate these issues in a very, sneaky way, right? If you're like a hardened racist and you're watching a great Star Trek episode, you kind of get carried away with that. And like, I don't know if Picard season 3 is sort of like, as you're describing, Cicero, a little bit like the pill pocket where you stick the medicine in and give it to your pet, It's like,
right.
She's chewing this and then it's going to feel good when you expand to the rest of the franchise. Right. That's probably true to a degree, but I think that as long as they stay the course on doing great story and great characters, you could talk about anything you want. Like Picard season 3 could have been a lot more expansive, I'm hearing, on not just representation, but not just for the sake of it, but for genuinely talking about those issues, and no one would be the wiser. They would just be like along for the ride, and then suddenly they're progressive at the end of it or something like that, right? Which happens to a lot of us who grew up on Trek. I think that filmmaking has like the best possible mechanisms built into the medium of being able to do that to people. Like some of these people that are getting knee-jerk reactions about, well, this isn't my Trek, they've sort of forgotten how they've been indoctrinated by a really good yarn. And like, that's the whole thing of it, And I think that if there's any lesson to learn from Picard season 3, I was a little upset about some of the nostalgia. I wasn't expecting to see any TNG characters. I mean, that's what they build. I just wanted to be in the universe again, like after the Dominion War, and I want to see what happened to the universe after that. And it felt like for a hot minute we're going to get that. And I hope that's the lesson they learn. I hope they don't lean into the like, well, let's invite every actor back except for the DS9 cast.
Yes.
Right.
I will also say too,
except for the good show,
one.
right?
Yeah.
I hope
I will also say too, like Star Trek is about like showing us our best selves and showing us
Yes,
where
absolutely.
we can be. And I think that, Cicero, to what you're saying, that's what Star Trek should be. It should be like, say like all the bullshit we're dealing with today, we move past that and we'll still talk about these issues, but like the talking about like the differences between like me being trans or someone being black or whatever, like those don't matter. We've moved forward, and those issues will still reoccur in different ways with like aliens or whatever.
Yeah, like
but we move past it
Romulans.
for ourselves. Exactly.
Right.
And I will also say too, without spoiling, Kyle, the second episode of Star Trek Strange New World season 2, I think might be my favorite episode of this modern Star Trek for exactly the reasons you just articulated.
Okay.
And that is all I will
know in
say.
a couple
'cause I don't
weeks.
wanna spoil.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, listen, we've gone for 1 hour, 59 seconds, or 59 minutes and 14 seconds. We probably should wrap this up. So if you guys wouldn't mind, just like a quick round the table, like just final thought on what is this season. Everyone thinks it feels different. My animus to having this conversation is like, is it different? And so why and is it? That's final thoughts.
Picard season 3 is a thing in and of is a nostalgia bubble in and of itself that exists outside of even seasons 1 and 2 of Picard.
Okay.
For me, no, you go.
No, go ahead, Jesse. Go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, I have many issues with the season, as been articulated. But what it is doing, and what I will say for it, is it creates great conversation, and that's the sign of art that is at least saying something that we should be talking about. And I will give it that. Is like there's nothing worse than a piece of art going out and you say nothing about it. It's like no, it exists.
So you must be talking
there's a
about
lot to say
Jupiter
about
Ascending or something. Right?
Yeah. Oh man, you're gonna get me with my Wachowski love. All right. Oh man. But yeah, no. It is a season that has given really wonderful conversations with all of you, and for that I think is very valuable. So it's like gotten me the chance to speak with all of you really intelligently about cool stuff, and I think that is what Star Trek can do best, is create conversations with diverse thought. So
I would say read a little brief thing that I wrote after it ended, and that is, and as I mentioned earlier when I was addressing something Cicero had said, like when the show ended, I was actually in a place of frustration and agitation and actually anger and stuff like that. And then I wrote, after a while, I just sat with it and I said, whatever its failings, and it certainly had them, both large and small, and we've gone over a great many of them today, and I don't think I've heard a single thing any of you guys have said that I haven't agreed with, even while I've said I loved this series, this season. I cannot regard the third season of Star Trek Picard with anything other than love. It gave me something I never thought I'd ever get, a chance to say goodbye to long-lost friends I didn't think I'd ever see again. And it returned something I thought I'd lost forever, an obsession with a piece of nearly 60-year-old art that has quite literally defined the shape of my life. And for the first time in decades, I was exhilarated to watch new Star Trek again. It plastered a smile on my face every week. It drew tears from my face every week. It made me literally leap up and whoop for joy every week. And whatever quibbles or genuine irritants I might have, and I have them, they are vastly outnumbered by an army of praiseworthy triumphs. And it is on those that I will choose to dwell. Soon I will forget my criticisms and complaints, or at least their gravity will recede. And the only thing I will remember were my bright smiles and my warm tears. I will only remember how this show made me feel. And I say that even while going, like, wanting to put a bunch of conditions on it, given everything you guys have said, because everything you said is so damn spot on. Everything you said is right. But I love that's art. Like, I love the fact that art can be a thing that you're like, God, I love this. And oh my God, there is so much toxicity, or this, they failed at that, or they didn't do that right, or this should have changed, or that should have changed. Like, those two things can coexist in the same time and space.
yeah.
Well, I will
Human beings
definitely
complex.
never forget how this show made me feel. That's for sure. But it's still an incredible piece of TV. A lot of people worked incredibly hard on it. There's incredible actors. The VFX is absolutely stunning. The music, the costume, everything. And I still love all Star Trek, and that's why I'm so passionate about reception and what it teaches us and where it brings us. So will I rewatch Picard? Absolutely. I've watched season 1 like 4 times, my friend, so try me. Will I maybe change my opinion? Absolutely. We say in French, only idiots never change their opinion, so
So does idiot in French mean American?
French people hate everybody. You know that, right? It means everybody, including us. But yeah, it definitely started a lot of passions, and even if I'm in some ways hurt, I'm absolutely ecstatic that they managed to fill up cinemas all over the country, that so many people are talking about this show, that it's bringing money for more shows, and that we had all these incredible actors on the show. So yeah, now let's see the next
The test
chapter.
is what's to come. Like I hope they had these same kind of conversations that we've been having, and then like the true test, because I want to see Terry Matalas do more Star Trek. Hands down, want him to do more Star Trek.
But I don't want to see him do Legacy. But I don't want to see him do Legacy.
If Legacy is bringing more TNG characters and stuff back, yes, absolutely. I do not want to see him do Legacy. Right. But I do want to see him do stuff. But I do hope that he's like, okay, I did this thing for this time and place. This, as you said, this sort of Force Awakens. But no, we're not doing that anymore. We're done with that. We did that. It was this time and place. Mm-hmm. I will say this, and I would just say one last thing, and I don't want to get us off topic. But I think that someone should have said at some point in this whole conversation, we should say Ed Speleers was amazing in this show. I thought he did a really good job.
Aragon himself.
Aragon himself.
Yeah, right. There you go.
Not to insult him. No, I have affinity for him. I will say I don't want Terry Matalas to do much Star Trek. I want Terry Matalas to do more shows. I want to see the next Terry Matalas show and have it not be a Star Trek. I want to see the next show he does because I think it'll be great, and I'm here for it.
Have you guys seen?
I loved when
I've not watched it.
12 Monkeys is great. I want to see the next Terry Matalas show. I want to see someone new. Like give me a black woman in charge of a Star Trek show. Give me a trans person, queer. Like give me someone from a new perspective. Like I want Terry Matalas to go and thrive, but I want to see someone new in the Star Trek scene. And honestly, I would say that about any of the showrunners, even like Mike McMahon, who I love. Like let's change perspective and get some new people in here.
Fewer white men in there.
Exactly.
Totally down with that.
I say as someone who adores Anson Mount. I mean, dude literally went on Twitter today saying "fuck transphobes" and literally quote tweeted me.
Yeah, I saw that.
Literally quote tweeted me and said "fuck transphobes," and it makes me very happy. It really meant a lot. Actually, it made me cry actually yesterday. So that man is wonderful. I say that with absolute love. But let's get more non-cis white straight dudes in the captain's seat.
100%.
Both behind the scenes and in front of the camera.
Right. And let's only have one show in current Star Trek where the main ship is the Enterprise.
I think we should try something different, like a space station. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. You are the Deep Space Nine nostalgia show.
Yeah, Babylon 4.
Right.
Yeah. Or
Babylon 9.
I'm just happy we got to see Spot again. That was a moment I legitimately teared up.
Yeah, that was
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. What are you doing, and where can people find you, Giraffe?
I'm live every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time with Strange New Pod. We review all Star Trek. I'll be at San Diego Comic-Con, and you can find me, I think, everywhere at lyrical_giraffe with one F because it's French.
Jessie.
You can find me at Jessie Gender on YouTube. That's where I do my video essay things. I also have a secondary channel called Jessie, and there I do big video essays about Star Trek, sex and Star Trek sexuality, and Star Trek representation, Star Trek, and other science fiction, pop culture stuff, and LGBTQ issues. I have a secondary channel called Jessie Gender After Dark, where I do my news reviews, reactions. That'll be putting every review of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. So check out that if you want my thoughts on that show. And then just because it'll be pertinent to this audience and it supports me, I am currently working on a short film called Identities, which is a science fiction I'm calling it like a hopeful dystopian film because it ends being hopeful, and it is about how we are all people forced to exist a certain way in a society, but how self-actualization allows us to tear down the systems that force us to try to be one thing. And it's a very queer film, but it is not just a queer film. And for the Star Trek nerds out there, it does star. We got John Delancey is going to be in it,
Nice.
which is one of the wildest things in my life to have done a phone call and Q picked up and said, "Let's talk about your script." That was wild.
Oh my god!
So I'm very excited about that,
great.
and that'll be on the streaming service Nebula. And if you go and sign up, if you look up, I think it's nebula.tv/identities. If you just look it up, you can sign up for Nebula, and by signing up there, that does show Nebula that you're signing up for my film, and they might give me more money to make more things in
Hey,
it.
that's
so
important.
sign up there.
Yes,
yeah.
it
So
is.
so that's everything I'm working on.
Beautiful. Cicero, tell us where we can find you on the interwebs.
I am at Stubby Stan on all social media platforms, and you can find me, or you can hear my voice doing podcasts such as Test Your Might, my weekly video game debate podcast. You can also, for people that are lovers of this video that we're doing, you can hear me on the aforementioned Discovery Debrief podcast, where we'll be talking about all of the new current Star Trek and Star Trek adjacent media, like the latest video game, Star Trek Resurgence.
Hell yeah.
If you are also just a fan of my voice and the things that I say, you can frequently hear me on the Incomparable Podcast Network, where we just talk about pop culture and nerd stuff all the time. I'm on there often. I think the most recent thing that I did was a series review of the ABC series Max Headroom.
Oh, that brings back some memories.
Yeah, so
I love that.
so if you guys are interested in that, you can go ahead and take a listen to that. And of course, if you guys are hearing me and seeing me, and you like the sound of my voice, the tenor of my voice is for hire. Please reach out to me whenever you feel like it. I'd love to audition.
But the question everyone's asking is, do you do a good Vin Diesel impression?
Only for family.
Brandon, what are you working on, and what do you want to plug, and where are you?
The last TV stuff you've seen is I did a bunch of episodes of the last season of Expedition Unknown on Discovery Channel. I just wrapped a couple months ago a new podcast, Bitter Blood, Murdoch versus Murdoch. It's basically Succession, the podcast, all about the Murdoch family. And also did one called American Football, about the birth of football. I'm not a big football sports guy, but I am a big history guy, and so that. But otherwise, you can see me every day on TikTok for hopefully awesome and inspiring and mind-blowing science and history content at Stay Curious, my friends.
Beautiful. And I'm a guy who works here, and I'm going to turn the lights out in a second. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you in the next video, and I'm going to stop.